This is Metro Week. Our top story, the future of water in Tucson. We'll find out how the city plans to recycle water in an interview with the new Tucson Water director. Then, our journalist roundtable analyzes the week's news.
Welcome to Metro Week. I'm Andrea Kelly. We often hear about the effects of drought and worry if there's enough water in the Colorado River to meet our needs. To address those worries, Tucson's water utility is planning to rely on more recycled water. Recycled water is exactly what it sounds like, and you may have heard the less enticing name for it, toilet to tap. This is the system. You get clean water in your tap. You use it. The leftovers go down the drain. The wastewater department treats that water. If we start reusing that treated water, we're recycling it. Tucson started using recycled water for customers with a lot of grass in 1984. It serves golf courses, schools, and parks, but there's more treated water than those places need, so most of it leaves the county wastewater treatment facility and goes into the Santa Cruz River. In the river, the water is further treated naturally as it seeps into groundwater aquifers. But we don't have access to the groundwater outside of the designated Tucson Water management area. The city says as surface and groundwater sources decline, the renewable resource of treated wastewater is going to be more important. Agreements the city made with the county and federal governments mean Tucson has the legal right to any wastewater Tucsonans produce. The city is making plans to use it not just in non-potable ways like irrigation, but as potable water. That means drinking water from the tap, treated so it is safe. To find out more, I interviewed Tucson Water's new director, Timothy Tomier. He took the job in February. Before that, he worked for an engineering company and previously was the city's water program director. So what's the timetable for Tucson's plans to use more recycled water?
We're always looking to increase our use of our recycled water, beginning with expansions of our current reclaimed water system. Whenever there's a large user of water out there that could convert to that system, we try to work with that customer in order to come up with the infrastructure necessary to create that conversion. So that's a continuing process. As we look toward the future and we look at additional uses of recycled water, whether that's through industrial uses or whether that's ultimately potentially for potable usage, that could be something within the next 10 years or so that we'd be looking at an implementation.
And what's the difference? You use the word reclaimed water. I use the word recycled water. Is there a difference?
There's a difference in how we utilize that terminology. When we think of the reclaimed water system we have today, we're talking about a non-potable use of that recycled water product. When we talk about recycled water more broadly, it could be any type of use, whether it's an agricultural use, an environmental use, the non-potable reclaim system that we have today, or even potable reuse in the future.
You've followed the progress of other cities, other municipalities that have switched or started to use potable recycled water, and they needed to do a lot of public outreach, a lot of education about what that means. What are Tucson Water's plans to tell people what would happen when we get there?
That's a part of an ongoing conversation that we need to have with the community. Where we are right now is we don't have an immediate need for potable recycled water. But we're always planning 10, 20, even 50 years into the future. And we know that whatever time frame that is that potable reuse may be required in the community, we have to have that conversation over years and decades in order to be sure that we're doing it correctly, that we're doing it for the right reasons, and that we're doing it in a safe manner. So we are definitely paying close attention to what other communities are doing. There are communities that already have potable reuse systems or recycled water systems in use right now. And over the next 5 years, you're going to see a number of communities implementing these programs. We're lucky in that we don't need that supply quite yet, and we can learn a lot from how these other communities implement it and how they have good, productive conversations with their customers, with their citizens about the pros and cons and why we would do it before we would ever actually implement it. So we're not waiting until the future need comes up and then try to have a really rushed conversation about it and implement something. We want to have a continuous conversation, whether it's for 5, 10, or 20 years, right up until the point where we would implement it.
During those conversations, how do you get over the yuck factor it sounds gross to use the phrase that people have used, toilet to tap or treated wastewater. How do you first breach that hurdle before you're educating them on what actually happens?
There's a couple of things that need to happen in order for somebody to overcome the yuck factor. One is an understanding of the urban water cycle and how water moves through our systems today and what actually happens to our wastewater effluent today. When people understand how that water is treated, how it is discharged to the environment in many cases, or reused for non-potable purposes, it increases their understanding of what's already occurring and how things are being done in a safe manner already. The second part of that is the education about what treatment would be done and how effective that treatment is in order to turn this product into something that is drinkable. There are many different ways that can be configured, the types of treatment technologies that are employed, which are getting better all the time, and also how that water may be blended with other more traditional water supplies. All of that comes together with an understanding of what actually is being proposed. Once that is formulated and discussed, we see that the support for that type of potable reuse goes up significantly, and it takes it out of the yuck factor through knowledge and understanding of what actually is happening, and then the ability to demonstrate it. That's the last step you take right up before you would implement it actually into the system, is demonstrate everything throughout that process that takes it from a wastewater to a drinking water. And when people can touch and feel and actually interact with that process, their acceptance of it goes through the roof.
What's at stake if the department were to say it's just not going to work to do potable wastewater reuse? What would be the options?
If the department were to say it, or if the customers were to say it?
Either way, if it just becomes not a viable option.
Well, the impact of that would be a water supply that we're not able to use for potable supply. So we would have to look at, does that leave us short on potable supply? Are there other alternatives that could be used to meet that potable supply? What we would find is that there may be other alternatives that are much likely more expensive. When we're looking at a future year and the cost of importing another supply or purchasing another supply, it's going to be more expensive than what we could do with our own wastewater effluent that we own and control. So that would really be one of the things we'd have to really look at, which we would anyway, is what are the options? And there may be options, and they might be more expensive, or there may not be options, in which case we have to understand what that means from a risk perspective of our ability to meet the water demands of the community.
We got some rain last weekend and this week, so how do you scale the different sources of water you use? And going forward as well, how would you scale each of the sources where you get water?
Well, the rain is great because it's not something we get all the time in Tucson. And what it does is it has an immediate impact on the demand for water in the community. So the way we manage that, both on the potable system and on the reclaim system, is through storage. We have a lot of what we call above ground or engineered storage. We have reservoirs throughout both systems, throughout the community, that we can store water and not release it to the system if there's not a demand on the system. But the biggest storage that we have is our aquifer itself. We store and treat and deliver our potable water through our aquifer. We do about half of our reclaim system through our aquifer as well. What that allows us to do is use nature as our storage, and then we can produce that water essentially on demand as the community's need for it goes up and down.
You were at a conference with other water officials in Washington, D.C. recently. What did you learn about Tucson's approach to its water supply as compared to other municipalities?
What I learned there is that, first of all, the regional partnership, that was our purpose for being there, was our partnership with the City of Phoenix and Metro Water District and Tucson Water in order to move water flexibly through our systems through exchange agreements and through a promise of being able to order water that would normally come to Tucson, deliver it to Phoenix, and in the near term, we're actually taking water that Phoenix is ordering and sending it to Tucson. That type of thinking was novel. That is the type of thinking that creates regional sustainability and resiliency for multiple cities and communities, that is something that you're going to be seeing in other locations moving forward. So that, I think that's what we brought to the table that has other people thinking differently about how can there be partnerships like that. What we took away from it, or what I took away from it, was that's just one idea and that's just one novel approach. There are about 100 different things that were presented there that were all light bulb moments. They were all things that got you thinking, wow, that's clever. That's really amazing that they did that. How could we apply that in Arizona? So that's where I think the biggest benefit of that exchange was getting people to think in terms of creativity. And you can come up with a lot of great ideas on your own, but when you actually interact with others and you hear what their experiences were, it gets you thinking differently, and it gets you thinking more about creativity and flexibility.
Since the department is proposing rate increases this year, it seems like every time I interview a Tucson Water director about proposed rate increases, one of the answers about why they're proposed is to take care of the infrastructure and things that the cost doesn't go away even if people conserve more water. So how is the department looking at trying to stabilize those costs?
You are correct. The aging infrastructure we have is all been installed over time, and it starts to age, and we need to keep reinvesting in that. So even if there's no increased water demand, we have an increasing need in our maintenance and replacement programs. We're also always reinvesting in making our water supply as resilient as it can be. And that's a long-term investment that we need to make, and the financial resources that have been dedicated to that have put us in the position we are today, where when there's a pending shortage on the Colorado River, we're concerned, but we're not alarmed because we've been prepared for that. So what we're looking at of how to stabilize that moving forward is a couple of things. One is making sure that we do a very deep look at the rate model that we use to generate our revenue requirements. We have a method of pricing our water that's based on some fundamental assumptions that were true 10 plus years ago. We used to be a very fast-growing community with a very fast-growing demand for water, total demand for water. What we've converted to is a still relatively fast-growing community with a flat water demand. We're using about the same water today, total as a community, as we did 10 to 15 years ago. That means we have to do some fundamental rethinking of how we price water and how we shape our rates. So with this year's revenue request and rate request, we're actually asking also for a 2-year window to go through a very detailed analysis of all of those factors. And when it comes to stabilizing our revenue, one of the things we want to evaluate is we have a fixed charge for water that everybody pays, and it's sort of a readiness to serve factor. And then we have the variable rates that are based on the amount of water we use. That is, the percentage we recover from fixed rates is about 26%, whereas our fixed costs are closer to 80%. So that's something we want to look at. Is that something that we change? The next 2 years are going to help determine that.
Hi, I'm Lorraine Rivera. Tonight on Arizona Week, understanding how delegates vote and the possibility of a contested convention.
You're going to be down to fist fighting and hand-to-hand combat because they're going to be scraping for every delegate they can find.
Now our Journalist Roundtable. Joining me in the studio today are Tom Beal of the Arizona Daily Star, Linda Valdez of the Arizona Republic, and my colleague Vanessa Barchfield. Linda, I'm going to start you on the topic of water, a little bit shifting away from Tucson Water, though. There are a couple bills in the state legislature that have to do with changing some of the historic laws regarding water use and water availability. First, let me have you describe what those bills do.
Well, there are 2 bills, and they are special interest bills that are designed to get around water management efforts in Cochise County. And let me give you a little bit of background. The 1980 Groundwater Management Act created active management areas where people were not supposed to, developments were not allowed unless there was a 100-year water supply. Now, a few years later, in 2007, the legislature said that rural areas that felt that was important to their water management could impose those rules on their own counties. Cochise County and Yuma County both did that. Fast forward to today, Sierra Vista, which is in Cochise County, wants to approve a very large development, 7,000 homes, about which there are questions, whether there is an adequate water supply or not. The first of these two bills would allow Sierra Vista just to say, oh, we opt out of the requirement. We don't have to prove a 100-year water supply. The second one is a little more insidious. It says that counties that have approved these requirements have to renew them, take a look at them again every couple of years, and they have to vote to renew them.
Like affirm back into the policy.
Right,
Okay.
they have to affirm back into the policy. Now these bills were adjusted a little bit. There were some amendments made as they moved through the process, but they have both moved through the process, and they are now back in the Senate for final concurrence. They've been on hold, and that may be because there are concerns in the Senate. I'm hearing that from some folks. It may also be because the governor has basically said no more bills until I get a budget.
Okay. Now, you're a columnist, so you can go into the realm of opinion. What do you think about those bills?
I think they're dreadful. They're both terrible bills, and this isn't based just on my opinion. I've talked to a lot of water experts, both off and on the record, who say this really undermines decades of water planning in Arizona, decades of efforts to demonstrate that we as a state are taking a responsible approach to development. And this creates an exemption, and to do that case by case is just really it's bad for water planning, number one, and number two, it just sends a very bad message outside the state about our commitment to water planning.
Do you have a sense of how the residents of Sierra Vista, feel about the development there? Are they supportive of it, or is it really something that the politicians from the region are sort of pushing?
I guess it depends. There's probably a wide variety of opinions. The city wants it very much. I imagine people that are supportive of the San Pedro River do not, because there are huge questions about the impact on the San Pedro of this much groundwater pumping.
We seem to be going back to an era of magical thinking about water supply. Do you find it odd that at a time when places like California are facing drought and really enforcing their water laws, that we're loosening them?
Well, there's an attempt to loosen this one. I don't know if it's going to be successful or not. I think a lot is going to depend on who the governor listens to. I would not be surprised to see this get through the legislature. The governor is a protege of John Kyle. John Kyle has a water center that he started when he left the Senate through Morrison Institute, and I don't believe that John Kyle would think this was a good water use. So a lot is going to depend on whether the governor is looking out for the long-term interest of the state.
And even 100 years might not necessarily be considered long-term. I mean, if you think about, I live in a neighborhood where our houses are 60 years old, so a 100-year water supply is inching toward the horizon of, the people who live there or who would sell their house. I do want to switch back to the Tucson Water situation, Tom, and ask you about in our interview, the Tucson Water director mentioned the long sort of public information, public outreach process that would take place before the city would start using recycled water. And I just want to have you kind of remind us what happened several years ago when the city began to switch to more CAP water in our mix of drinking water. What happened public outreach-wise at that time?
It was a disaster. And I know that, we all know intellectually that you can treat water and make it safe. And it doesn't matter what the source is. But when you change the source, things can happen. And what happened back in beginning in 1992 was that Tucson began to use its Central Arizona Project allotment for the first time. So we switched from groundwater to surface water, and we did it without changing the infrastructure before starting to deliver it. That's akin to saying, today I'm going to put diesel in my car without changing what your car is. And lots of bad things happened. I looked it up the other day. There were 14,000 complaints. There were $2 million worth of repairs that the city had to do in people's homes because people's homes weren't set up to receive water that had twice the dissolved salt content, that groundwater has. It had a different chemistry, and it had a different flow. They introduced it into the system from a different place. It scoured all the old gunk out of the pipes, delivered brown water to people's homes, and as a result, Tucson stopped using its surface water and now infiltrates it into the ground and then pumps it back up.
Compare that to what's going on in Flint, Michigan today.
Flint, you know, same thing. They changed the source. The source isn't necessarily any worse than the source they were using before, but it's different. And I read that, you know, it's much the same thing. The pH content of that water changed. It scoured old pipes, and they have the additional problem that there are a bunch of old lead pipes in their system, and it's leaching lead, which is, you know, a real concern, especially for families with children.
And that speaks to, you were talking about the different content in the water, so different minerals or natural elements are what's enabling the leaching.
Yeah, over time, you know, things inside of pipes get inert, you know, things build up, you got gunk building up, it's sort of protective. But then when you change the chemistry and the flow, or whatever you change in the system, you have to do it with a recognition that things are going to change and things are going to leach out. Albuquerque, when it switched from entirely groundwater to a surface water supply from the Rio Grande, it brought in people from Tucson Water and said, okay, you guys know what we shouldn't do because you did it wrong. Tell us. And they had no problems with the switch.
Lessons learned. So
Yeah.
maybe that's also being applied in the next potential switch over for Tucson Water. As Tim Muir mentioned in our interview, we have several water sources, but all of them seem to be fragile. So, and we depend on the Colorado River water to be pumped uphill more than 300 miles to get to Tucson. And Tucson is a big user of that water supply. Yeah. Is that the best way to access water for this region?
No, I mean, it's the best way we have right now. If we didn't have that water supply, our growth in this valley would have to stop because we don't have enough underground water supply to replenish what we use. So there would have to be severe restrictions on what we use, or we'd have to find another supply. So it's the supply we have. You know, is it going to always be there? Not always, not every year. We don't know what the future holds, but we're pretty certain that it's going to be more people and less water. And so there's lots of things that, you know, that people are already planning to do to meet that need.
All right, well, we'll keep an eye on that long-term story too, not just a long-term situation. Vanessa, I want to switch over to a topic that we touched on a little bit in last week's roundtable, but seems to still be kind of at the front of people's minds, and that is the calls for University of Arizona President Ann Weaver Hart to resign. First, remind us what this story is, and then we'll move on to this week.
Right. The story really began in February when Ann Weaver Hart was appointed to the board of the DeVry Education Group. The group is under investigation. It's been sued actually by the FTC. It's under investigation by the Department of Education and the VA for misleading prospective students about their earning potentials and career opportunities. Hart was appointed at the same time as was UC Davis Chancellor Linda Katehi. The public outcry in California was such that Katehi actually resigned from the board, not from her position, from the board within a week of her appointment. Ann Weaver Hart remains, and the story sort of escalated in March when State Representative Macario Saldate wrote a guest column in the Daily Star, essentially saying that her position on the board of this for-profit private university system was incompatible with her position as president of a major public university. Last week, actually, 21 other state lawmakers wrote a letter to the editor of the Daily Star backing him and, in fact, escalating it and calling on her to resign.
From the U of A.
From the U of A.
And I bring it up this week, not much has changed in the last week or so, but it seems to me like everywhere I go, people stop and ask me, what's going on with that? What is she going to do? What's happening? What's the latest? So even though we don't have new news to report on this, it's in the front of people's minds. And this week, actually, it was part of a graduate student event?
Yeah, yesterday, the graduate students at the University of Arizona staged a walkout. They gathered on the steps of Old Main, of course, right in front of Hart's office. And one of their complaints was her position on DeVry. I mean, there was really a sort of litany of demands that they were making, including better salaries, better health insurance, childcare at the university, things like that. But certainly DeVry was an issue that was brought up a number of times.
And Linda, you wrote a column about it this week. You used a couple of strong words. One of them was that the actions of the president have been tone deaf and lacking hubris. So I just want to ask you, what's sort of from your perspective, what's wrong with the president of the university keeping this position at DeVry as well?
The problem is that she is hurting the university by doing this. She is using the prestige of the university to get this job. That's the only reason they want her on their board, is because she's the president of a prestigious university. So she's getting paid a very good salary by the state, and then she's in excess of $600,000. Then she goes and takes another job for $70,000 a year, which is more than a lot of the parents who are struggling to pay tuition for their children at the University of Arizona. And in the process, so she's using her position, she's using her prestige to get this job with DeVry. Does that help the university? I don't think it helps the university at all. It helps her. If anything, this whole debate and discussion is damaging to the prestige of the university. It's distracting from the issues at hand, which, as the lawmakers point out, she should be engaged in trying to get some funding, which has been severely cut over the years. She should be focused on it. This is a full-time job, I would assume, at that kind of salary, that being president of UA is a full-time job. She should be focused on that job. And I think that's really the issue. Is her being on that board helpful or hurtful to the U of A? And I think it's hurtful to the U of A.
You also have a recommendation that if she does want to help the pipeline of students who might not have access to the U of A, she should look to Pima Community College.
Well, and that's one of the reasons she cited for wanting to be part of this board, was that she wanted to help students who could never aspire to go to the U of A. Well, I mean, obviously the U of A has agreements with Pima College, and I'm well aware of that. But it comes back to the core mission, and it comes back to she is president of a public university. And she should be working within that system, within the public higher education system, to help students. If she thinks that the for-profit system is a better way to go, well, then fine. Let her resign and go work for the for-profit university.
And Vanessa, what's been Ann Weaver Hart's response to all of this?
I should say that I haven't been able to actually speak with her. She declined my request for an interview, but did issue a statement. And basically, she says she's going to stay on the board. I mean, that was the essence of the statement, and she gave several reasons. Number one is that she's compliant with ABOR policies, the Board of Regents policies, which is true. I mean, no one is suggesting that she's broken a law or a policy. You know, she's allowed to serve on other boards. As Linda said, one of the sort of reasons she has for joining the board is to address the needs of students who wouldn't make it to the University of Arizona. And then also that she wasn't chosen actually because of her position as the University of Arizona president, but because of her qualifications. I think that the response that I've gotten from people to my story was that, you know, they find the suggestion that she was chosen not because she's president, but because of her qualifications, kind of laughable. And the sense that she's addressing the needs of students that couldn't make it to the university, downright, you know, that's just offensive.
All right, that story, we don't know if it'll continue or not. If it does, we'll keep following it. Tom, I want to end on another story that you've been covering, which is the mosquitoes that we have in Tucson are the kind that can carry Zika virus. And I feel like people are either hyper concerned about this or not at all. What is there that people need to know in our last minute?
People need to know that the mosquitoes, the Aedes aegypti mosquitoes that can carry and do carry the Zika virus in South America, Central America, and Mexico are here. They're here in large numbers at times of the year. Not right now, so right now you don't have to be concerned. There has been something that is protective of us, and it's a mixture of climate and lifestyle.
And that's why the mosquitoes don't carry it yet.
They haven't carried the other diseases that they were potentially able to carry.
All right, thank you so much, Tom. That's our show, but there's always more to talk about, and we have even more on the future of water in the Southwest coming up on PBS 6. Arizona Public Media's documentary Beyond the Mirage airs this weekend. For airtimes, go to the website beyondthemirage.org. Thanks for watching.